Lord, we are so thankful to have reached this point of the semester that is by your grace, because you are faithful in every single moment of our lives that we are here. And help us not to forget that, and help us not to forget the great vastness of your faithfulness, one that extends from before creation, through the creation of the world, through Israel's history, as you are working out a plan. Victory after victory you accomplish, spectacular act after spectacular act, both in power and in kindness and in patience and in holiness, you have done. And as we continue thinking through the book of Joshua and Judges, help us to see your power and your intentionality, your plan, as it all moves deliberately toward Christ. Help us to see that. Help us to love Christ then and realize how much you wanted to honor him, that you would direct the history of this entire universe to that very end. And may we love you as God the Father more because of it. Make us thankful people now. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, we have been talking about Joshua, and we've been talking about how, relative to the big picture of God's plan, this advances God's movement of preserving a seed, that is Israel, who will give rise to the ultimate seed, that is Christ. But as God preserves Israel, he preserves them as a kingdom. Anyone know what the rest of the phrase is? Kingdom of priests. Exodus chapter, anyone remember? 19. Super important. And as such, that's why he gives them and gave them the Abrahamic covenant, which promised what? Land, seed, and blessing. And so now Joshua moves Israel into the land so that they can have that international impact. And in doing so, God demonstrates who he is, that he is a conqueror, that he is victorious. In fact, we saw that with the 3 campaigns. Anyone remember what they were? Central, and then what? Southern, and then what? North. Okay? And in those 3 campaigns, we witnessed a very deliberate theological agenda with all of them. One is that God is central. The other one is that he is a God of immense power. And not only that, but he is a God who has the breadth of power as well. He not only can show off his might in spectacular acts, but also against odds. And that is what we see in the flow of Joshua. And let me just say this. We're going so fast. And the danger of it is that you don't stop and think about how magnificent God is in all of these things. You need to do that. You need to do that. Just contemplating God as the hailstone sniper is really cool. And we need to remember that. We need to remember that as we go forward, because that's exactly what Joshua is showing. It is showing as a book the glory of God in that way as he's advancing his plan. Now, for that very reason, we are now in Joshua 13 and following, point 2. We there? Point 2. And we're going to move through this rapidly. What you have in Joshua 13 and following really is God's showcasing of his might and glory, but now he's moving that to a specific agenda, an agenda of conquest that we talked about earlier, that Israel should have this international impact and God will really make things right. That's what the conquest demonstrates. He will invade this world, he will judge sin, and he will do so definitively in the end. And so in light of that, that's what this geography and the divided map of Israel in this point establishes. So with that in mind, letter B, main point. We there? Here it is. God establishes his nation to make an international impact. God establishes his nation to make an international impact. And there's 2 things you need to understand about this, and jot them down, because we won't have time to go through this in depth. But if you go to IBEX, when you go to IBEX, you must go to IBEX. You will. And when you are looking at the map and you start to see how this fits together, keep what I say in mind, because all of those pieces fit in this larger picture. God establishes his nation to make an international impact. Here are the two sub-ideas within that. Two sub-ideas. Here's the first one. The first idea is that God arranges Israel in the land to work out his plan. God arranges Israel in the land to work out his plan. You might not remember this, or maybe you kind of remember reading about this, but in two passages, and just jot this down, Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33, Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33, what you have is God saying to Israel, this tribe is going to be here, and it's going to experience these things, and it's going to have this kind of impact on the world, and this tribe, it's going to be here, and it's going to do these kinds of things, and have this kind of on the world, and these kind of struggles. Are you all with me on this? So when God is putting the tribes of Israel in certain places in Joshua chapters 13 and following, what he is doing is he's working out that plan. Does that make sense to everybody? The placement of the tribes is not accidental, it is intentional. It is so that they will have the global impact prophesied in Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33. Y'all with me on this? Okay? That's the first subpoint. Here's the second subpoint. And throughout all of this, Israel's going to fail. Throughout all of this, Israel will fail. Perhaps on the exam, out of however many questions I give you, apart from that really big question at the end, the short answer question, which is, tell me everything. I might ask something like, true or false, does Israel conquer all the promised land? And the answer is already, you should know, is what? False. Israel doesn't do that. Remember, we already talked about that city, Gibeon, who lied to Israel. They occupied that central hub of Israel, all the roadways of Israel. Well, we already know. They already lost at that point. Well, the rest of the book is going to accentuate all the different areas that they just can't conquer. All right? That they just can't conquer. And what this forces us to understand is that Joshua looks to the future. Joshua looks to the future. Oh, it establishes agenda, but an agenda that is not fulfilled now. It will be done when Christ returns. And the prophets will pick up on that, and the New Testament will pick up on that. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay? And so that's what we're going to see overall quickly in Joshua 13 and following. Everyone ready? All right, next page. So, you can kind of see a regional map. And in points 1 and 2, we have just some general instructions, as well as Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe Manasseh's inheritance, as was stated in the book of Numbers. In point 3, we see that Joshua realizes that Israel needs to conquer this land, and they hope to conquer this land, but they don't always do it. Accordingly, next page. Here we start to see God's promises kept and his plan continuing to move forward. So point 4, for Judah. Now why do we think Judah comes first? Because it's the what? Royal tribe, yes? We already know, hey, they're fronting Judah for this very reason. Good. Now, two things you need to know under point 4. First, Caleb. You guys remember Caleb? Caleb's from the tribe of Judah. Isn't that interesting? A good leader, tribe of Judah. Start to see how this works? All right, good. But more than that, and within that, Caleb receives an inheritance. Do you guys remember Caleb was one of the what kind of spies? Good or bad? Good. And so Caleb actually receives the piece of property. It's this place called Hebron, or Kiryat Arba. And you say, why is that important? Because what were the Israelites afraid of? They said, man, the promised land, it has a bunch of what? Giants. Very good. Kiryat Arba is the stronghold of the giants. See how that is so appropriate? Caleb says, give me that piece of land. Why? Because it will show that in the end, I was what? I was right. I was right to trust the Lord. Do you see how that works? And so Caleb's reception of the land and that specific inheritance proves God's faithfulness. It proves God's faithfulness. But here's the second thing you have to know within point 4, which is this. They didn't drive out everybody, though. They didn't drive out everybody. Verse 63 of chapter 15. Not everybody was driven out. And so the conquest is not what? Over. Point 5. Manasseh, or really the half-tribe of Manasseh with Ephraim. On one hand, you've got faithfulness. remember Zelophehad's daughters? Do you remember them? The daughters who wanted to inherit the what? The land. Remember that? They get their land. Cool, huh? I mean, that's really neat to see. However, surrounding them and all around them, Israel's not able to possess the land. Point 6, Joshua even gets aggravated by the tribes for their laziness in not trying to preserve the land. You can find that in chapter 8, verse 3. Same thing, Benjamin is assimilated, and for the remaining tribes in points 8, say through 14, they are potentially settled in those lands, but they actually do not totally possess them. Do you see that? They are potentially settled in those lands, but they do not necessarily actually possess them. God says, this would be your land. This should be your land. But they don't always take it out. They don't always own it the way they should. And so there is this tension. On one hand, God is putting people into places, fulfilling promises, showing this is his agenda to make a certain kind of impact, an impact already explained in Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33. But at the same time, what we have is that Israel cannot capitalize on it. Next page. Along that line, in points 15 and in point 16, God promised that there would be the cities of refuge. Do you guys remember how that worked? If you accidentally killed somebody, you could run to this city so that the person wouldn't kill you back. Not the dead guy, but his relative. Are y'all with me on this? And what the cities of refuge showed, is this, that God is merciful. He's merciful. That's why there are 6 cities. Why 6? 3 on each what? Side. Yeah, because if you killed somebody, and you're just running, it would stink if you were down south and the only city's up there and you're trying to run with the big brother chasing you with a big axe, I mean, that would just be terrible. So you don't have that. You just have 6 cities so that you can get there quickly. Does this make sense to everybody? In fact, Israel in Deuteronomy even has laws about their roads and the road conditions. Think about that. Why? Because if you have bad roads, you're not going to be able to run as fast to what? Get to safety. So the whole infrastructure of Israel is to showcase we have a merciful God. And so Israel is formulating, even in their layout, a theological agenda to announce to the world. Go ahead.
Just with this, you talk about that someone can have faith and they can be a believer, but then they break the model. So is this necessarily mainly for people who have faith for righteousness but don't obey the model?
Not necessarily. These cities of refuge are even for an unbeliever who accidentally, relative to the law, kills somebody. As in, it's not premeditated in their mind or something like that. It's still sin, but it's trying to prevent further bloodshed after bloodshed has already occurred.
Okay. Was it mainly for the people of faith and then all unbelievers that might...
Nope. It was for all Israelites. Okay. Yeah. So faith is not a prerequisite for these laws. Okay. It's just to demonstrate the model, which is this. God has mercy, and he cares about life. Cares about life. And so Israel's physical land is to establish that. If you ever read ancient Near Eastern myth, you will see that ancient Near Eastern myth is fascinated with 2 things, death and sex. It's not really life, it's just sex. Death and sex. And Israel has a much different perspective. One that cares a lot about life. And if you actually think about it, what the ancient Near Eastern people focus on kind of mirrors American culture in a lot of ways, doesn't it? In that regard. We need to have a very clear focus on life. Life. Really prizing that. And Israel's whole country, the very infrastructure that they have, does so. Along that line, point 6, 48 Levitical cities are distributed amongst Israel. This is pretty obvious. Who live in Levitical cities? Yeah, Levites. And why do they live there? Because they are there to minister to every Israelite. They are there to be the kind of Levite on duty for various cities of Israel. And their distribution indicates that they are there to help Israel cultivate a lifestyle of worship. And so the land is settled, both in the tribal boundaries, as well as the cities of refuge, as well as the 48 Levitical cities, in a way that Israel can be a nation that worships. That Israel can be a nation that has an influence on all the other nations in this very theological manner. Does this make sense to everybody? That's what's going on there. Next page. So, here's what we learned so far. God conquers. He's a champion. And he's put Israel in the land with the hope that they will be a theological nation. That actions speak louder than what? Words, and they will have that. They will have that by their very infrastructure. That's the agenda. But now you need to make it happen. Now you need to capitalize on both these things, and you need to say, hey, we want to continue that. We want to uphold that. And this is why you have what we call a covenant renewal ceremony. You need essentially what we call buy-in. It's great that you have a land like this. It's great that God did this and showed this. But if the people aren't behind it, it won't do a thing, right? Won't do a thing. And so that's why you have a covenant renewal ceremony. And here's the main point. God's national work through Israel will continue. God's national work through Israel will continue. That's the main point. But you need to understand and kind of jot this on the side. Crisis is coming. Okay? A crisis is coming. There are problems. Joshua doesn't end on a happy note. That's what you have to understand. Joshua does not end on a happy note. And the crisis is what is going to push us closer to the seed. Does this make sense to everybody? Joshua does not end on a happy note. It ends with a lot of questions, and the crisis of it is going to push us closer to the seed, who will reign over everything. All right, so here we are. Point 1. Covenant continues with the eastern tribes. They go over and they say, hey, you guys need to continue in this. You shouldn't fall into idolatry. And they're listing all these things. It's very, very fascinating. Keep the law. So essential. And the irony is everything that Moses just exhorted for them to do. In fact, look at verse 5. Someone read it out loud. 22:5.
Only be very careful to observe the commandments and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you to love the Lord your God and walk in his ways.
Stop right there. Love your Lord your God and walk in his ways. Where have you heard that? Love the Lord your God business. What? Yeah. What book of the Bible? Deuteronomy. See this? This is the Constitution. This is the core. This is everything that the law is pointing to. This is how the model is projecting. Deuteronomy is clear, and Joshua is very clear, and Israel is supposed to be very clear. This is what you're supposed to do. So cling to God. Love God. Have no other gods besides God. Great. And then what do they build? Letter B. They build a what? An altar. Now, the Old Testament is clear that Israel should jointly worship at a single location. Israel should jointly worship at a single location. Why? Because how many gods are there? One. So therefore, how many places should you worship? To show that. One. Does this make sense? You can worship privately. That's fine in your house. Whatever you eat and drink, worship God. Yes. But when you're coming together as a people, you're going to come together at where? One place where God chooses. Does this make sense? And he can choose one place and then he could switch it to a different place. Fine. But you got to go to one place because you're showing together as a people. We're all united. We don't have a different God. We don't have 5 different gods. We have what? One God. Because how many gods are there? One God. Does this start to make sense? So what's the problem when you build another altar? What does it look like? You got like at least 2. Does this start to make sense to everybody? You got 2. And that's an issue. And that's an issue. Because it looks like, basically, the east is separating from the west. Does this make sense to everybody? It looks like the Jordan River is forming this barrier between the east and the west. And so Israel comes out, and they're going to kill everybody on the eastern side. And you say, whoa, that's extreme. Do you guys remember in Deuteronomy 13, maybe we didn't cover this in depth, but you might have read it. What do you do with somebody who's engaged in idolatry? Anyone know? You kill them, yes? In fact, it even says when a city of Israel is apostatizing, you destroy them. So is Israel doing the thing by attacking the eastern side? Absolutely. But what does the eastern side say? Well, we didn't make this altar to worship from. We just made it why? Say it again?
Witness.
Yes, a witness that we are still part of what? Israel. Now, on one hand, you're like, well, that's cool. I mean, I guess. But do you start to see the problem? You have to do something that looks pretty sketchy, that looks almost sinful, to say that you're still part of what? Israel. And even more, isn't it kind of bad if you already, from like day one, don't feel like you're part of what? Israel? Do you guys see what I'm saying? This is a problem. You will start to soon see that Israel is going to fracture apart. You will start to soon see that idolatry will be easily introduced into the nation. Does this make sense to everybody? And Joshua is already showing how it's going to happen. They already know we've got problems. Joshua does not end on a happy note. Point 2, we there? So, Joshua says to the leaders, this is really concentrating, letter A, on the leadership. Hey, you need to finish the job. Finish the job. Look at chapter 23, verse 3. Read it out loud.
And you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations because of you, for the Lord your God is He who has been fighting for you.
Everyone hear that? The Lord your God is the one. It is He that has been what? Fighting for you. What should that remind you of? The name of what? Israel. You guys got it. Joshua is saying, this is who we are. We point to the God who fights for us. So you continue the work. You continue the work. And this is such an important truth. Look at chapter 23, verse 14. Someone read it, please.
And now I am about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls all of these.
Stop right there. You know in your where? Heart and soul. Why does Joshua focus on the heart? Because what book focuses on the heart? Deuteronomy. I was saying it's always been about the heart. Keep going.
All of you that not one word has failed of all the good things.
Stop. Not one what? Word has what? Failed. That is the level of God's faithfulness. Out of all the words, out of all the different things, the good things which God has spoken to you, not even one what? Word failed. That's how sure God's promises are. They are good to the last word. They are good to the last detail. That should tell you about your Bible, and that should tell you something about your God. And Joshua is reminding Israel that so that they would understand this is how faithful God is, and therefore you need to pursue Him. You need to trust in Him. Leaders, you've got to move forward. But there's a double-edged sword here. Someone read verse 15. Keep going.
For just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled to you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things.
Okay, stop right there. No word fails. So that means the good things will come true, but also what? Bad. It's your accountability as well. What you sow, you will reap, because God is not mocked. That is the logic that those passages are all pulling from together. And so Joshua warns the leadership. You got to push everybody forward. And here's the deal. The very fact that you have to explain this to the leaders is good, but it also can show what? A problem. You might have a problem with leadership coming up. And kind of spoiler alert, judges, did they have good leaders? No. And so you see where this is going. Does this make sense to everybody? There are problems. Joshua ends on a sour note. And just to reiterate that, okay, letter B, are we there on the next page, I think? Yeah, sorry.
Just like the foundational passage
Yeah, there's Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 27 and 28.
Okay.
And Leviticus 26.
That's the books before that?
Well, Leviticus 26.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, those would be the main passages. Letter B, we there? So Joshua says, let me lay out Israel. Now he's not talking just to the leaders. He's talking to all of Israel. And he's saying, let me explain to you guys what you need to buy into. I mean, God has done all these things. And really, if you read verses 1 through 13, letter B, you're going to see this is a great summation of Israel's history, of what God has been doing. And if you have me for Christian theology, or not Christian theology, essentially Christian thought, if you guys remember me talking about etiology, where you came from, all that kind of stuff, what is Joshua doing? He's giving them an etiology, isn't he? He's giving them where have you come from? What has God been doing? And now you need to know your place in this world. Now you need to have clarity of what God expects you to do in this generation, at this time. This is your moment. This is what you need to do. And so, God says this through Joshua, chapter 24, verse 14. Serve God. Now, fear the Lord. Serve him with truth. And turn away from your other idols. Get rid of all of that. This is your moment. He's gotten you in this land. The land is supposed to be this theological agenda that projects an international witness. Engage in this. Does this make sense to everybody? That is what Joshua calls Israel to do. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Verse 15. Read it.
If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve.
Stop. This is what is on every plaque, isn't it? In the house. As for me and my house, later on as Joshua will say, we will what? Serve the Lord, right? I put that on my door. I put that on my plates. I put that everywhere. Bumper sticker, sure. Facebook status motto, whatever. Yeah, good for you. Until you read the verse. Okay, it sounds so good. Keep reading. Read it actually, start over, and let's read it carefully again. Read verse 15.
If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your forefathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me...
Stop. What is Joshua saying to Israel? Look, if you don't want to serve God, choose today whom you will serve. As in, this false god or what? The other false god. You got a lot of false gods you can serve. Choose one. Why? Joshua already knows, are they going to serve the real God? No. So this statement is actually a sarcastic statement showing that you are an apostate. So maybe you don't want to put that on your door. So but everyone understand the logic of this. This is not choose Yahweh versus everything else. This is choose bad God number 1 versus bad God number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Are you all with me on this? That's what this verse is saying. Yeah.
Is that like showing the hypocrisy of them?
Yes. Remember what we said about the Israelites, what God said about the Israelites in Deuteronomy. You need to love God with all your what? Heart. Which means you need to circumcise your what? Heart. But you don't have a heart that loves God. Remember that? What does Joshua say here? I know you guys, I read Deuteronomy. I've been talking about it this whole time. You guys don't love God. Because you don't have the heart to actually even begin to what? Love God. Go ahead and choose which other bad God you want to serve. Because you're never going to love him. This is kind of like very pessimistic preaching. Or like hyper-presuppositional apologetics. Like, you can't believe. I'm just going to tell you what you already know you can't believe. Bye-bye. It's like, but I want to know that. No, you don't. You don't want to know the gospel. Sorry. And Israelites are like, so what do we do? You can't. All right. So why are we here? You're not. You won't be pretty soon, That's how Joshua is really dealing with this. Question somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
But so why does he add that he will serve if he can't either?
Right. And so Joshua here is probably showing himself as exceptional. And he's here rhetorically also trying to encourage Israel, this is the right direction. This is the right direction.
So would it be wrong if, I don't know, like if we put that on our plates because like we're in the new covenant now?
Yeah, you could just put the last phrase on there.
Yeah.
But not choose today whom you will serve.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you don't want to put that on your plate because it's like, all right, choose today whom you will serve. Everybody, choose a false god. You don't want to do that. You can put, but as for me and my house will serve the Lord. That's okie dokie. But usually we put like the first point, ... second. And what did the people say? Next verse. And this is the whole paradigm that we've been talking about is just explicated in these next verses. What did the people say? Verse 16, someone read it quickly.
The people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods.
Oh, we're never going to do that. Oh, no. As for me and my house, everyone's putting this on their bumper sticker now because let's just have it all the way. And what does Joshua say? I think this is hilarious. What does Joshua say to the people? Verse 19.
Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to...
Stop. You will not be able to. Joshua's like, we will serve too. No. You're not able. You have no capability. This isn't just that you won't. The Hebrew verb here has the idea of you don't even have the capacity. You have no ability in this area. This is like a human being trying to fly with their arms. You have no capacity. It is impossible for you to serve the Lord because he's what? Keep reading. Because he is...
Because, for holy God.
Stop. He is a what? Holy God. You have no ability. Have you learned anything from the Pentateuch? He's holy. You can't serve him. He's not like the God that you're thinking about. You've idolized. And so, here's what we've seen. The eastern tribes, they have a tension because they realize that they might be excluded from Israel. And so they engage in things that are not idolatrous but could easily lapse into idolatry. And then you have the leaders, and they're summoned to lead Israel, but there are tensions there. And then you have the people of Israel, and they say, yeah, we'll follow God. And Joshua says, what? No, you won't. That's how Joshua ends. Have a happy Thanksgiving. No, I'm just kidding. That's really how Joshua ends. And Joshua ends with Joshua riding on a big, big rock. This is your accountability. You said you wanted to engage. Okay, here we go. And he writes down the blessings and curses on this big stone so that Israel understands. You said you were going to be under this, but realize this. You can't keep it. You can't keep it. And so point 3, all the leaders who have been keeping Israel in check, people like Joshua, people like the priest Eleazar, they all die. And now you know where it's going to head, yes? If you already have instability of the eastern tribe, if you already have instability of the leadership, if you already have instability in the people, everything's doomed to collapse. You all with me on this? And Joshua's setting up for that. Joshua's setting up for that. And before you're like, well, that's terrible. This is like horrible. No, it's to be what? To be continued. Just like a good TV show. Yeah? Leaves you on a cliffhanger, pushes you forward. That's exactly what Joshua's doing. And with that, Joshua moves to what? To Judges. You guys got it. Now, one last thing before you flip the page. One thing that happens at the end of Joshua, and you need to know this, Joseph. Joseph's bones are buried in Israel. You guys remember Joseph? What book was he in? What book of the Bible? Genesis. Very good. And Joseph made Israel promise that when they got to the promised land, they would bury his bones. And they did. And why is that important? Because if you're thinking, man, everything's about to collapse, everything's going crazy, you just remember this. Can God's faithfulness override hundreds of years of chaos? And the answer is what? Absolutely. He's still faithful. Throughout all of this, he is totally in control. He never breaks a promise. And so you know, even as things seem to be getting out of control, God has a plan, and he will not fail. and this is going according to plan. Does this make sense to everybody? Oh, one other thing. Just jot this down somewhere. Or memorize it. Two things, really. Do you guys remember how I said Ai, the city of Ai or whatever, however you want to say it, means ruin? Do you guys remember me talking about that? And how it should remain a ruin to this very day? You need to know that. It's a very important truth. But there's another important truth that goes along that line. Jericho. Remember that city? Walk around 7 times, blah, blah, blah. Good. Jericho. Joshua pronounces a curse on anyone who would rebuild Jericho. Joshua pronounces a curse on anyone who would rebuild Jericho. You're going to need to know that for later. Have you guys ever heard of Ahab, the king, and Jezebel? Remember her? Just to illustrate how bad Ahab's time is, in Ahab's time you have a person who rebuilds, guess what city? Jericho, and actually falls under the curse. But no one cares. Why? Because they're that evil. Are y'all with me on this? You need to know these details. They come in handy for later. Y'all with me on this? Judges. Let's go. The book of Judges. God preserves the nation. That's the theme. Really, if you're thinking about it, Joshua settles Israel into the land. Now they're there, and they said, yeah, we want to abide by his plan, but we can't. And so you have this crisis, and what the crisis does is it now focuses what is going on with Israel corporately back onto the seed. And so you can think of it this way. It's almost like an hourglass, or a reverse hourglass. It's like a triangle. I don't know, diamond. There you go. Oh, that's going to be important for later. Okay, so this is like a diamond. It starts with the promise of the seed, but to promise the seed, you have to talk about the whole country of Israel, right? So that God can establish a witness nation and preserve that line so that the seed will come. Are y'all with me on this? And God does a bunch of things to do that, but now history is going to move back to the seed, who is also a king. Does this make sense to everybody? And that's exactly where history is turning, and that's exactly where the book of Judges pushes us. The book of Judges pushes us in that direction. And it is for this very reason that it's talked about like this, that God preserves the nation. That God preserves the nation. Why does he have to preserve it? He has to preserve it so that in the end you can get a king. He has to preserve it in the end so that you can get a king. And Judges is the story of how God preserves the nation for a king, but also establishes the need for a king simultaneously. Did you get that? Judges is a book about how God preserves Israel unto their king, but also in the midst of that highlights the need for a king. That's the strategy of Judges. And so in relationship, letter A, to the contents of the book, here's how the book works. Here's how the book works. Really, 3 parts. 1, you start to see everything that Joshua warned Israel about comes true. They're an evil nation. There's a downward spiral. They have physical and spiritual failings. It's all true. And so that produces a crisis. And here it is. Here's the second thing that you're going to see. You have a crisis of leadership. You have a crisis of leadership. All these judges, they're all bad guys to varying degrees. Okay, well, maybe not all, but most of them are bad guys. All right, most of them are bad guys. And that puts the nation in dire straits. And so they need a king because they have a crisis of leadership. That's what the second part of the book establishes. And the final part of the book establishes this. Forget about leaders. The Israelites themselves are what? Evil. And they need a king. And so what Joshua warned about, first part comes true. Second part, which is a great majority of, shows that there's a crisis of leadership and you need a king. And third is, forget about leadership, there's just a crisis in Israel, period, and they need a king. In fact, a key phrase in this book is, there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was what? Right in their own eyes. Key phrase. It shows us that Israel is wicked. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes, but that's correlated with the fact that they have no what? That they have no king at that time. They have no king at that time. And all of a sudden you start to see the need for a what to come? A king to come. Does this make sense to everybody? All right. That's how the book works. Right? That's how the book works. In relationship to the original audience, Judges, on one hand, shows, hey, God raises up individuals. God raises up individuals, sometimes not so good ones, to preserve his people. It does demonstrate his majesty. It also demonstrates to the original audience that you need a king. You need a king. This isn't something we made up. God is forcing history toward that direction. And you need a certain kind of king. That's what Judges highlights as well. And that Israel is a part of a problem, and their problems can only be solved by the king. In relationship to generations beyond that, when you understand the book of Judges, you understand that history is deliberately moving toward Christ. History is deliberately moving toward Christ. Judges is the bridge that forces history into that direction. All right? Questions? All right, next page. Historical background information. Okay. You need to be familiar that there are a bunch of nations at this time, like Philistia. There are different cities of the Philistines. There are the Canaanites. There are the Midianites. There are the Moabites. There are the Sidonians, the Hivites, all these different people. You need to be familiar with those nations because they'll come in handy. You also need to be familiar a little bit with geography and how this book works. Judges sometimes has overlap. Y'all with me on this? So that two judges are actually ruling at the same time. And you say, wait a minute, how can you have two judges ruling at the same time? They're ruling two different what at the same time? Two different places. You guys got it. Two different places of Israel at the same time. And here is an important theological lesson. Very important theological lesson. Israel at this time, we already said east and west, they are what? Separated, yes? And even inside of themselves, they are what? Separated. One thing that they don't have is a strong enough leader that can unite the whole what? Kingdom. In fact, just zoom forward a little bit. You guys know David, you guys know Saul, and you know even Solomon. But what happens after Solomon? The kingdom what? Divides. What does this show you? The true king of Israel can what? Unite all the tribes what? Together. The historical background of Judges and understanding how it works historically and geographically demonstrates to us even theology. A theology that will be picked up and explained further later on. Questions? Make sense to everybody? All right, next page. So, prologue. Israel's initial failure. Israel's initial failure. Look at Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. What does it talk about? Oh, here's the main point. Israel's initial failure starts the need for a king. Israel's initial failure starts the need for a king. That's the main point. Let's talk about the main text. So when we look at Joshua 1, what does it say? Joshua 1:1?
After the death of Joshua.
Okay, so Joshua dies. Yes? And you're like, that's great. Now look at Joshua 2:6. Judges. Yeah, excuse me. Judges.
When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land.
Okay, and verse 8.
Then Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of...
Okay, wait. I thought Joshua 1:1, he what? He died. And then all of a sudden he's sending people out, and then he dies again. You're like, resurrection. No. Okay, it is not like, I died, but now I'm alive, and you're bad. And then I die again. No, it's nothing like that, okay? It's just showing two different angles of what happened surrounding his death. Y'all with me on this? Two different angles. Judges chapter 1 highlights Israel's inability to take the promised land. Inability to take the promised land. You could put it this way. They have a physical failure. They have a physical failure. But then, on top of that, point two, in chapter 2, they don't just have a physical failure, they have a spiritual failure. They have a spiritual failure. they are unable to really love God. In fact, one is endemic of the other. Their physical failure happens because of a what? Spiritual failing. Okay? So chapter 1 and 2 highlight Israel's failure on both the physical and the spiritual level. And in fact, this introduces us, and just write this below, to the cycle that you have found in Judges chapter 2 concerning how this works. Basically, this is what happens. Israel engages in idolatry. Then what does God do? He punishes them. But then they repent, quote unquote, kind of superficially. So God raises up a what? A judge for them to deliver them. And that judge provides a little bit of temporary relief until Israel what? Slips into idolatry again. And what you learn through this cycle is this kind of cycle, but it's also a downward spiral. That's what you have to know. This is a cycle, but it's also a downward spiral. Each time the cycle happens, Israel just gets worse and worse and worse. And not only does Israel get worse and worse and worse, their judges get what? Worse and worse and worse. I think by now you realize that the Bible doesn't just show perfect role models, yes? So you don't want to tell kids or people, be like this judge. Like, be like Samson. You mean a womanizer? No. Be like Gideon. You mean somebody who doesn't trust God? No. So what we want to say is these people were sinful. And it doesn't make us better than them because we're holier than thou art or something. What it does is it shows God uses flawed people, because the only true hero is who? God. Yes, in Christ. That's it. So let's be very clear about that. Let's be very, very clear about that. So, in light of that, that's how you need to read about these judges. All right, next page. Look at the judges cycle really quick under letter A. You can see that chart there, and you can see how they're arranged. You can also see the different areas of Israel that they're trying to defend at a certain point in time. And what we're going to try to do as quickly as we can is just move through this. That's my goal for the next half hour. And some things will be pretty fun and funny. But all throughout, you need to see this downward spiral. So here's the main point, letter B. God delivers his flawed people by flawed people. God delivers flawed people by flawed people. And it shows you that you need a what? A true king. A true king. So, if this is a downward spiral, or since it is a downward spiral, you start at the very what? Top. The very best. So your very best guy is a guy named Othniel. And Othniel is actually related to a guy named Caleb. Do you guys remember Caleb? So they have, Othniel is connected with him. And Othniel fights this guy, Kushan Rishtaim of Mesopotamia, in verse 10 of chapter 3. And here's what's important. A couple things to note. First, Othniel leads a united Israel. Othniel leads a united Israel. In light of what we talked about, why is that rare? Because usually judges only lead what? One part, right? Very hard to unite them all. Second, Othniel leads them against Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, big or small? Big. International, big international force. So Othniel leads a very big united effort. Third, Othniel engages in pitched battle. This is important. In pitched battle. No secret tactics, no sneaky business or anything like that. He is totally upfront and honorable. Pitched battle per ancient Near Eastern standards. Okay? All right. And interestingly enough, Othniel's from what tribe? Judah. Dun, 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 dun. I mean, yeah, this is like, by this time, anything good always comes out of Judah, right? So, I mean, you should just realize, yeah, this tribe, God is shaping them for this role. In any case, this is where it gets good, and that's basically where good ends. So, point two, Ehud. You guys remember this, and Ehud is really dealing with Eglon of Moab, all right? Now, you might say, well, do you guys know the story of Ehud? He goes in and he's really what-handed? Left-handed. So they say, hey, show us your weapon. You usually draw it from the opposite side. So he's like, no weapon on this side. Well, you're like, hey, you didn't check out his left hand. And he kills the guy. And it's pretty gross, right? I mean, Ehud says, hey, I have a message for God for you, king. And the king's like, what is it? Eglon's fat, and he sticks the blade into the guy, and the blade what? Gets sucked in by the fat. I mean, you guys read this? And you're like, well, that's pretty gross. And it's gross, even more grosser, I think. Grosser, more disgusting, that they all thought that Eglon was going to the what? Anyone know? To the bathroom, so they can smell all that's going on, and you're just like, ew, that's disgusting. There's a reason why it's disgusting. Because it is disgusting. And you're like, well, yeah, no. It could have been sanitized by the biblical account. All the Bible could have said is that Ehud struck Eglon down. Wouldn't that have been equally accurate to say? But the rhetoric points out this is a disgusting act. Ehud used unsanctioned means to accomplish freedom. He was an assassin. He did something dishonorable. Remember, what did Othniel do? He had a pitched what? War. A real battle. Where you come at me and I come at you, and we know all the terms and we know all the agreements, and we're going to do that. Does this make sense to everybody? Ehud does it by secrecy and deceit. And the Bible says, look, it's not as bad as it's going to get, but it's still what? Still bad. Still bad. And so this, you start to see, okay, things are getting worse. Things are getting worse, and you have a limited amount of time, and there's a struggle. I guess you could say there's a struggle for Israel to remain faithful, and so Israel collapses and doesn't repent, and so you get point 3, Shamgar. We there? 331. Shamgar is on, who attacked Shamgar? Anyone see in chapter 331? The Philistines. Do you guys know what side of Israel the Philistines are on? No, they come from this way, the west. Okay, so the Philistines are pushing this way. Do you guys know what side the Moabites are on? The east. Okay? So what's happening? Why is Shamgar over here defending, and why is Ehud over here defending? Because they're getting squeezed from what? Both sides. And you do not have a single guy who can unite the whole tribe to defend itself. Does this start to make sense to everybody? That's why you have the record of Shamgar and Ehud. It's showing you, unlike Othniel, who could unite all the tribes, remember that? What happens now? All the tribes are what? Split apart. They're broken up. You don't have a true leader. You don't have a true leader. And even the leaders, they don't even act honorably. Deborah and Barak, point 4. We there? Now, there's this war with Sisera, and that's actually going on in the north. So they're not just getting squeezed. If you're looking at Barak and Deborah, that's going on in the north. And here's what's interesting. So you're not getting just squeezed from the west and the east. You're also getting squeezed what? From the north. You have instability on every single side. Now, on a totally joking note, Barak, the word means lightning, and Deborah means bumblebee, like, the things that make honey. And one time I had a professor say, hey, this is a great combo. What happens when you put lightning with bees? And I said, you get Buzz Lightyear. That's what I yelled at in class. And he's like, no. That's how I became a professor. So but yeah, this is a great combo. And you might wonder, though, having said that, wait, I mean, this verse is often used by people who want to support women being pastors because, look, God has a woman be a leader. Y'all with me on this? But what do you have to remember? This is a downward what? Spiral. And what this begins to show you is that we have such massive problems in Israel now that God actually has to revert to having a woman help what? lead. It's not a positive, it's actually what? A negative. Now you might say, but is it wrong for Deborah to do what she did and all this kind of stuff? Well, God obviously told her to do certain things. Are y'all with me on this? And in fact uses her to shame who should have really been doing the job. The men, Barak. God uses her to shame the men. For that very reason, the victory does not go to the general. It goes to another lady who sticks a what through the guy's head? A tent peg. Remember that? And so that is the whole point of the story. It is that this is actually a collapse of leadership. A collapse of leadership. All right. Much more could be said about the nature of this battle. For example, if you look at verse 14, it says this, that Deborah says for Barak to go down into the valley, and you say, why is that important? Because everyone back then, except for Israel, has chariots, yes? And so chariots, they don't really ride too well on hills. Y'all with me on this? And so if you're going to defend against chariots, where are you going to position yourself? On a what? On a hill. Does this make sense to everybody? But Deborah says, stop staying on the hill. Go what? Go down and meet them on the plain. And God will still give you victory. And what seems to have happened is that the ground became really soggy and what? Stuck all the chariots so that the Israelites could just go around and just, they're all stuck. So you just can kill them all. And that seems to be what happened in chapter 4. Deborah and Barak's song, letter B. Lots of cool things are happening in this song. Shows how God fought valiantly, but here's some things, and I mean there's even some trash talking against Sisera's mama. It's pretty funny. But the whole point is this, and a major point is this, not just that God has victory, but if you read it carefully, you start to see that Deborah and Barak criticize other parts of Israel for not helping them. They criticize other parts of Israel for not helping them. Again, what does this show? Is there a leader that can unite them all? And the answer is what? No. No. There is no leader that can unite them all. Gideon, point 5. Gideon, point 5. So, at this time, Israel sins again. And it's just a further downward spiral. Someone read verses 8 through 10 of chapter 6. God has something to say.
But the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of bondage. And I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land. Also I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice.
Everyone hear that? God is starting to show more wrath because Israel is continuing to be stubborn in their foolishness and in their sin. And he's warning them, my patience is limited. My patience is limited. This isn't the last time he's going to say this, but he's giving them a warning. You are just not listening. Even though everything should tell you, I can deliver you. After all, I did it the first time, and I've done it all these other times. You just are not listening. You just are not listening. And so this shows you how bad things have become. In any case, God calls now Gideon, verse 11 and following. And here's the message that God has for Gideon, in essence, and that is this. The Lord your God is with you. Look at verse 12. Angel appears to Gideon and says to him, the Lord is what? The Lord is with you. With you. That is going to be key. Does Gideon understand, and will Israel understand, that God is still with us? Which should remind you of like Jacob, right? Jacob schemes, God what? Redeems. But this is along that line. And Gideon really, really struggles with this in so many different ways. And I just want to show you that because it demonstrates that Gideon is tremendously flawed. He is not a good leader in so many different ways. And nevertheless, God, the only reason that they win is that God is there. We could talk about his lack of faith and how he cuts down an altar and his dad has to defend them and all this kind of stuff. He's not bold for the Lord. We can talk about how Gideon does the whole fleece thing. Are y'all with me on this? If God has already said, I'm with you, then should you be distrusting God? No. Gideon is testing whether God's word is really what? True, after God has already validated it. Are y'all with me on this? So the whole fleece thing is problematic. But here becomes kind of a hilarious one. So Gideon, and you guys know the story very, very well. Gideon gathers a very, very big, and we're in letter B now, a very big host of people, 32,000 people. Yes? Everyone remember this. And then some people leave. What does God tell Gideon to do? If you're scared, you what? Go home. All right. God says too big, so he gets rid of some, and then you get rid of more, minus some more, and now you're at like about 10,000, which is still sizable, but it's too small. Or too big, rather. You need it smaller. And so God wants to winnow this down further. They're at this place called Ein Harod. You guys should remember that place when you go to Israel. If you will go to Israel, you will see it. It's a really cool place. I like it. But God wants to winnow this down further. And the whole point of this is to show it's not you, Gideon. God is with you. Stop trusting yourself. Trust God. Trust God. So, there are three groups of people, yes? Or really, two groups of people now. And what does God say? Those who lap the water, what? Like a dog, you do one thing with them. And those who are on their knees, yes, you do another thing with them. Are you all with me on this? Let's actually read the exact description carefully. All right? Let's read the exact description carefully. Go ahead and look up chapter 7. And let's see what exactly God says. So go ahead, verse 4.
Then the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he whom I say to you, this one shall go with you. He shall go with you, but every one of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go.
Keep going.
So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, you shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue, as a dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink.
Okay, so you have the lappers and the kneelers. Okay? You have the lappers and you have the kneelers. Okay? And by the way, what does God say? I mean, who does he say to choose? Keep reading.
Now the number of those who lapped, putting their head to their mouth, their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink.
Okay, so you have the lappers are the key people, yeah? They're the ones who are chosen. Y'all with me on this? Now, Gideon has already told everybody, if you're scared, what? Go home. So we have one group of people out of the 22,000 people or whatever. We have one group of people who were what? Scared. We'll call them normal. Okay? I'm a normal Israelite. Are you scared? Of course I am. Go home. All right, gone. Bye-bye. So now you have two people left. All right? You either have, and this is really a binary option, you either have people who are what? Not what? Not what? Not scared. They're like Rambo. Like, oh yeah, I'm ready to kill people. Like, I'm buff. Give it to me. Or, like, I'm an Israelite and I'm ready to take people out. Like, I'm a military man. Like, all right, good. So you have Mr. Military Special Ops Man, right? That is what one group of person you have. But you have a third group. Who would those people be? Yeah, they're crazy. They don't know better than not to be scared. We call them the nerds. You know, it's like, I always wanted to hold a sword, like, like, you're going to die in battle. I don't think so. Like, don't you think it's scary? No, So you have the normal people, they're all gone. And so now out of the lappers and the kneelers, you have Rambo or you have Bambi, okay? I mean, you got one of those two options. That's what's really left. Now think about it. Here's the water. If you are kneeling to drink like this, you are on alert, yes? So are you Rambo or are you clueless? You are Rambo. The lapper, the one who laps like a dog, think about it. Do dogs like kneel and put their paws to their... No. What does the lapper do? Like a dog, sticks his head in the what? Water. This is what they look like. Oh, I'm so thirsty. Like... They're just ready for a bad guy to come right behind them and what? Like to their head and chop it off. Does this make sense, everybody? And so, let's be clear. Lappers are what? Nerds. Kneelers are Rambo. And who did God choose? The nerds. Okay? Gideon's like, no, not them. And that's why God earlier has to say, the ones I choose, they will go with you, and the ones that I say, this will be. And Gideon's like, okay. And then he's like, no, we had an agreement. So everyone with me on this. This is what's going on with Gideon. All right? God chose the nerds, but doesn't that kind of make sense? Because what's the theme? God is what? God is with you. You don't need Rambo. You need God. But for some reason, Gideon, you're just having trouble getting that into your head. So I'm going to give you the nerds, which actually starts to account a little bit for their battle strategy. Okay, just think about this with me. There's some affirming signs for Gideon in the camp. Do you guys remember that with the barley loaf that comes to me as a dream? You guys know what I'm talking about? If you don't, read the passage, and God affirms it again to Gideon because he just lacks faith. He's not a good leader because he doesn't really trust in God. However, going back to this whole nerd thing, these nerds are like, all right, we're the 300 chosen, like, we're all Spartans or something. And he's like, can we have a sword? And Gideon's like, no. If you have a sword, we'll all be dead, You guys playing the band? Yeah, we all played in marching band. Have a trumpet. And that's what's going on there. So that's why it's like, hold a trumpet and hold a torch. This is much safer for everybody. And it's really because, look, in the end, yeah, these guys don't know how to handle weapons. These guys are the nerds. And on top of that, a trumpet puts God on display. You don't need to win with a weapon of war. You just need to announce God. And that's exactly what a trumpet does. And so in the end, God causes confusion. And how do people die in this battle? It's not because Israel sweeps in and kills them. They are all confused, and they what? They kill each other, right? The nerds are like, oh yeah, we're not. You're not doing anything. You're just blowing a trumpet, and it's fine. And Gideon is probably secretly relieved because he's like, these guys aren't military? I don't know what to do with them. And look, there is so much disunity at this point. Ephraim feels left out. Disunity again. There's in fact a kind of a mini civil war that takes place at this time, a mini one, not a big one, but a mini one, as certain cities refuse to help Gideon, and Gideon has to punish those cities. Are y'all with me on this? It's for the first time. It's not just, hey, we're not going to help you, but hey, we're also going to what? Hurt you. Do you see that? Israel is that disunified at this time. Nevertheless, you have a bad leader, lacks faith, and it just keeps going downhill from there. In a singular moment of goodness, letter C. We there? Chapter 8, verse 23. Someone read what Gideon said.
But Gideon said to them, I will not rule...
Stop. I will not what? Rule you. What do they want to make Gideon? Their what? Their king. What does this start to show you? Israel knows we need a what? King. We've almost hit rock bottom. You haven't really yet, but you've almost hit rock bottom. And Gideon says, but I'm not the king. And it's not just because Gideon's so pious or whatever. Gideon knows what? I'm not a king. But here's what becomes very interesting and really terrible. What does Gideon actually do? What does he ask Israel to give him? Earrings and all this kind of stuff. Does that sound familiar? Give me your earrings, give me your gold. Yeah, the golden what? Calf. This tells you how bad Gideon is and how bad Israel is. Are y'all with me on this? That they could do a deja vu moment of one of the most famous acts of disobedience in their history, and they don't even catch it. Does that make sense to everybody? That's how bad it is. Put it this way. A judge is to restrain evil, yes? What does Gideon actually do? He promotes it. He promotes evil. That's how bad this has gotten. There is no good king in the land. There's really a crisis of leadership. Next page. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I'm confused with verse 24. When described Jesus as the Ishmaelites, do you see that?
So you're looking in verse 24 about what?
About Israel being described as Ishmaelites.
And what do you mean by that? They are...
He's saying that, and Gideon said to them, let me request of you, every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil, for they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites.
Okay. So the Ishmaelites there, I see what your question is. It's not saying that they were of the lineage of Ishmael. It is Ishmaelites is also a term for traders or merchants. Because do you remember back in the time of Genesis, the Ishmaelites sold Joseph into slavery? Do you remember that? So that terminology actually also refers to someone who is engaged in shopkeeping, store, merchant, trader, as in trading goods. And so it's showing that how they had that money. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, now, what we have is Gideon's, kind of half-son, I guess you could say, or illegitimate son, Abimelech, point 6. And we need to push through this rapidly. So let me just give you some key points about Abimelech. First, Abimelech's name means my father's king, which is a kind of ironic name, isn't it, for two reasons. One, is Gideon a king? No. Two, but it shows you Abimelech wants to be a what? Wants to be a king. That's what's on here. And so Abimelech kills all of his brothers, 70 men on one stone. And Abimelech, or almost all his brothers rather, Abimelech is cursed by one of his brothers, one of the last remaining brothers, and that curse actually plays out. And you have total chaos in Israel. You actually have a city that attacks itself. And so do you guys remember me saying that for the first time in Gideon's time of reign, you have Israel actually fighting against Israel on a very, very small scale. It's just between cities. Are y'all with me on this? This shows an escalation of that. It's not a full-blown civil war, but it's big internal unrest. In other words, Israel's not just collapsing because other nations are attacking it. Israel's collapsing because even domestically, people are what? Killing each other. Are y'all with me on this? That's what's going on here. And it's total chaos there. And here's the irony. Is Abimelech a real king then? No. And in fact, the only way he becomes king, and the closest he is king, is that there's this lady that just stabs him through, or actually kills him by throwing a stone on him, and someone stabs him through. All right? Do you guys remember? Cursed is the one who what? Hangs on a tree. And you remember me saying that connects with the Baal Peor incident with people being put on stakes? The same verbs are used there. The only way Abimelech is a king, the only manner Abimelech is king is in the way he what? Dies. That's the closest he ever gets to becoming a king. Are y'all with me on this? And so we have tremendous problems. All right, point 7. Everything's downward spiral. People are trying to become kings. They have no business becoming kings. They only throw the nation into further chaos. Point 7, we see that with Tola and Yair. Look at point 8. What does Yair write on? Chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Yeah, he rides on a donkey. You're like, well, that's cute. Why does he do that? You need to understand this. People who rode on donkeys back in the day, they were considered to be, guess what? Kings. They were considered to be kings. Israel knows we need a king. We need a king. They just can't find the right guy. In fact, every guy they find gets worse and what? Worse. Are y'all with me on this? So, let me keep going here. By the way, just on a side note, who rides a donkey also? New Testament. Jesus on the donkey in what event? We call it the triumphal entry, yes? But you already should have anticipated that a little bit because, do you guys remember Genesis 49? Shiloh coming. What does he do? Does anyone remember? He ties his colt to the what? To the choice vine. Donkey to the vine. Because it's implied that he was riding on his what? Donkey. Because he's a what? He's a king. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And do you start to see Israel needs a king? They know kings ride on donkeys, so they're having people ride on donkeys, but they're just waiting and waiting for the right one to come, and then eventually one will come, yes? The one riding on a donkey, humbled. Yes, in this case, Zechariah 9, leading into Matthew. Y'all there with me, okay? Jephthah, point 9, Jephthah. We don't have a lot of time to talk through the whole issue of Jephthah, but let me just say this. Jephthah was born, if you're like, how bad can it go? Jephthah has no credentials to be a leader. No lineage. He doesn't act honorably. He's a bully to his fellow brethren, even though they were bad to him too, so I guess what comes around goes around. He tries to engage in diplomatic relations, which is hilarious, because it's so bad. It almost reminds me of Donald Trump a little bit of how he talks. No, it's seriously, like, here he goes, and he starts talking in chapter 11, verse 12. Jephthah sends out these messengers, and he's like, why are you fighting on my land? This is my land. And then the king responds to him. He's like, I'm fighting against Israel, not you. It's not about you. You're pretty egotistical. So, I mean, the whole rhetoric that Jephthah uses is way over the top. He doesn't have diplomatic skills, and even more, he makes a foolish what? You guys know, this is famous. The foolish vow. Yeah, the foolish vow. And there's a debate about this vow, and let me just explain it quickly. Some people argue that this vow means that Jephthah will consecrate to the Lord whatever comes out of their house, or give a burnt offering. Hear that "or" there? So that you have an option. Y'all with me on this? And the conjunction can go either way. Some people would say, no, this is about Jephthah consecrating whatever's in his house, the first thing that comes out, and offering it up as a burnt offering. Are you all with me on this? And grammatically and linguistically, it has to be and. It has to be and. Okay, everyone understand the issue? Is it or is it and? Do you have an option, or is it just actually all lumped together in one thing? Does this make sense to everybody? The answer is and. It has to be and. In fact, you guys already know that. When you offer something as a burnt offering, what are you doing? You are making it what? Consecrated. Total what? Dedication, yes? That's exactly what Jephthah wanted. Now, you say, is that vow a good vow? And the answer is what? No. Not good at all. Not good at all. But it shows you how bad people what? Are at this time. Are you all with me on this? Okay? Now, after Jephthah, we have a series of more people. In fact, one of them, point 11, Elon, rides a donkey. And then you get Samson. Let me just put some quick things about Samson, just for you to think about. 1, Samson was supposed to be a Nazirite, but he broke his vow all the time, yes? 2, what you also need to realize about Samson is he does pretty crazy, amazing things. Do you guys remember that one time, like, he picks up a gate and walks it all the way home? Do you guys remember that in the middle of the night? You got to think about this. You're like, oh, it's a door. What's the big deal? A gate at the time of Israel, if you actually calculate the specific gravity of a gate, could be anywhere between 3 to 10 tons. So here you have the soldiers, and they're like, yeah, we got this. You know, we have a gate here. And then you have Samson with his long hair, and he's just like, boop, 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 walking off with 3-ton gate, you know, and then he comes home to Hebron. By the way, Hebron is walking uphill for like 30 miles. So he's just like, I'm picking up a gate for 30 miles all night. And then you just drop it off. And every Israelite guy, Magen David, like right there, they're all like, what just happened? He's like, you just got an upgrade. New game, congratulations. I'm going to bed. Look, Samson is a womanizer. Samson is a person who's just so arrogant toward God. Samson does not submit to his parents. Samson wants to marry a pagan. Samson does all these wrong things. Are y'all with me on this? And God uses every one of his sins to facilitate Samson judging the Philistines to keep them in check. Do you see how that works? You want to marry this pagan girl. Okay, fine. That puts you in Philistine territory. They steal your wife, so you set their fields on fire. Well, remember, the Shvelah is like the breadbasket of Israel, yes? So if you set all those fields on fire and the Philistines occupy those fields and the Philistines have no what? Food. He just destroyed their food supply. Does this start to make sense to everybody? He kills all their elite military troops and all this kind of stuff. He does everything over and over, but it's not ever for the right reasons. Yeah, it's always because it's motivated by his sin. Y'all with me on this? Put it this way. He does what is right in his own eyes. Give me that girl. Why? Because she's good in my eyes. That's what he says. Y'all with me on this? He is Israel in their heart. That's what the text is making with those kind of connections. And by the way, just to emphasize it, what do the Philistines gouge out? His eyes, for that very reason. See how that all works? Delilah technically hires a barber to cut his hair. Why? Because you have a professional job. Okay? You don't want to make a mistake and wake him up and get destroyed. So, look, the hair is not magical, but it demonstrates his trust in who? His reliance in God. His connection with God. They poke out his eyes, they bring him out, and here is kind of the sad thing. You know what happens in the end, right? Samson pleads that God would allow him to what? Kill the Philistines one last time, yeah? And God grants his request, even in a terrible, terrible man's life. I mean, that's rock bottom, right? You got people killing their daughters to keep a vow to Yahweh, totally twisted. You have a man who takes what God has given to him as a gift and totally perverts it to his own ends. That's twisted as a leader. And now, though, God gives him grace. Yes? At the very end, he allows Samson to win, to have conquest. Are y'all with me on this? As he always should have. And what does that demonstrate to you? Has God given up on his people just yet? No. Are any of those guys the right leaders? And the answer is what? No. But God gives assurance, I'm still faithful, and the right leader is still yet to what? To come. Have a good day.